So hi, everybody, whoever you are, wherever you are. It's really early here. I just took my kids for an early breakfast so I can shuttle them on the school bus. But I've been very much looking forward to this conversation and to reaching out to this part of the world. For those of you who speak Arabic, Assalamu alaikum. As you probably can tell, my name is Arabic. The original is Juleyka. So though, very present connections to your part of the world. And I'm really excited, as I told the organizers, I was so honored when they invited me, because I'm really excited to see what you all do with this medium. And you guys, in that part of the world are incredibly resilient. You are incredibly creative, and you have made unbelievable contributions throughout the civilizations. And so I can't wait to see what you do with podcasting. And so my offer today is just some advice on best practices that have worked for us as a company that started very small and is still relatively small. But as I like to say, we're small and mighty. For how to set yourselves up for success and for fun. And so I'm going to go through some of the basic guiding principles that I tested and tried and continue to test and try as I put teams together and as I build LANTIGUA-WILLIAMS & Co. And also, let me remind everybody, somewhere in our digital booth, there's a code for you where you can get a 25% discount on a one-on-one session with me or with Jen. And I'm sorry that Jen couldn't be here, but she's on the West Coast, and so it's super early for her, and she has a child, and so I really didn't want to deprive her of any more sleep than necessary. So find our booth, sign up, for the sessions. I'm happy and excited to hear about the shows that you're working on. All right, so first, a basic guiding principle as a leader, right? And so this is for all of you who are founders, for all of you who are going to be leading teams, for all of you who are going to be world building, right? Because this is what we're doing as creators. We are building worlds. In our particular instance, we're doing it in digital. So I'm going to give definition of leadership, because as a philosophy and as someone who has to embody leadership every day in big and small ways, this has been where I go back to. So when I feel like, am I doing something wrong here? Am I expecting too much? Am I not sharing enough? I go back to my very simple definition of leadership. And that is, leadership is the continuous redistribution of power. That's it. Your job as a leader is to redistribute to your team all of the power that you accumulate by default, right? Because you started the thing, maybe it was your idea, maybe you picked everybody who came on to work with you. So you are the leader, right? And it's a great thing to be the leader. It's a wonderful privilege to have people who believe in you, to follow your idea. But it's a big responsibility, like Spider-Man's uncle reminds him, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And so you have to continually check your actions and your decisions and how you treat your team against something. For me, that has been the that my job is to redistribute any and all power that I accumulate. So how does that happen in real life? It happens in multiple ways. One, the way that I set up each team for each show. So there are 8 of us at my company full-time, but then there's, what I call the constellation of other amazing collaborators, which can range from anywhere from 10 to 40 contractors, freelancers, engineers, photographers, fact checkers, composers, researchers, tape syncers. We have an incredible array of people who collaborate with us, right? And so starting with my core team, I set up what I call the golden triangle, and it literally is a triangle. And so this consists of 3 people who are the core heart nucleus of every team. And that's the editor, the producer, and the host, right? So I build all of the teams around this powerhouse of 3 people. And usually I'm none of those people, which is probably hard for people to believe. But I make sure that I'm none of those people, because I also believe that if my team needs me, that I'm actually in their way, right? And so I try to get out of the way before it's even possible for me to get in their way. And so when I set up the structure, to be able to act independently without me. Now, let me make sure to underline the fact that I remain executive producer of everything, right? Because I still want to weigh in. Like, I still want to be able to say, can I be in that meeting? Can I hear, the audio? Can I see the script? And if I don't give myself a role, then they might not invite me. And so I remain executive producer of everything we make, just so that I have the opportunity, because, to me, it feels like they're having all the fun. So I want to be in on the fun sometimes. But I am not part of that golden triangle that I set up. So it's very important that each of them understands that they need one another, right? And thankfully, I have the most unbelievable, gifted, talented group of people at LWC, and I handpicked every single one of them. I wooed most of them for months and years at a time. I had to grow the company before we could even afford to bring them over. And so these are people who I have admired and respected and dreamed of working with. And so I hold them in very high esteem, and I tell them all the time, because I think that that's also really important. And so they know that they're really necessary for us to do beautiful things as we've been doing. But then there's another charge for them. And the charge is that the editor has to be the listener's advocate, right? So in the room, when you're making decisions, in the room, when you're having discussions, as you are talking about the things that need to happen, the editor is the person who has to continually raise his or her hand and say, but what about the listener? Is that going to confuse the listener? Giving the listener enough information? Did we just lie to the listener? Like, what's happening here, right? So this person has to be continually thinking out how the show that we're making is going to be experienced by the listener, and making sure that that experience is as seamless and wonderful and enjoyable as possible. But obviously also, we want to challenge the listener. We want to make them think about things. We want to make them think about other ways of seeing the world. A lot of the shows that we make have a social justice component to them, especially on the client side of our shows. And so the editor has to maintain, that intellectual elasticity and maintain that interest for the listener, so that it doesn't ever feel like a passive experience. So that's the editor. The producer, show's advocate. So the producer is in charge of saying, that doesn't make sense to do in the show. Let's try something else. If we're stuck with this idea, let's try something else. How about this? Or, there's too much narration in this segment. Can we put in, a clip in there? Or where are the scenes? Like, how can we come into it? How can we get out of it? All kinds of technical production decisions, right? And the reason that I specifically charge the producer for the show is that the show will live independently without any of us. It will go out into the world and make friends and bring those friends back to us. And so we want to make sure that the show is, like a well-mannered, intelligent, confident teenager, who will be invited to other people's houses because they pick up their plate and put it in the kitchen, and because they say please and thank you, right? And so that's the role of the producer, to make sure that holistically the show really stands on its own, that it has a clear identity, that it is consistent from episode to episode to episode. And so that's obviously. And then the host. the host is an equal collaborator with everyone else. And I know that the role of the host, varies according to all kinds of things outside of where we work. But for us, the host is integral, because the host is the person who has to manage our relationship with the person we're making this for, our listener. And a really, really important job, right? With their voice, with their personality, with their intelligence, they have to continue to not just enrich the experience of listening to the show, but they also have to convince our listener to come back for the next episode, and then to maybe bring their friends, and maybe bring their mom, and maybe bring their colleagues, right? And so that relationship is really, really important. And so our hosts, they don't just read a script, they're part of the entire process. They are helping to do table reads. They are listening to roughs. When we're testing different types of audios, when we're working on if we're doing original scores, which we're doing more and more, they're also part of that, because whatever is happening audio-wise has to seamlessly work with the personality of the host and the energy and the sense of being that they create, because we're really creating a place. Right? We're creating a place for people to come and gather around the content that we're creating. So that's a little golden triangle that, seems deceptively simple when I started to develop this notion. But I was inspired by the fact that I read a lot. Like, I read a lot of science stuff, I read a lot of tech stuff, I read a lot of business stuff. So all the time I'm picking up ideas from different places. And I read somewhere that the triangle is the strongest naturally existing shape. Triangle. And I thought, that's amazing. Let me think about that. How can I apply that, right? Because as many of you know, nature repeats patterns, right? Like, there's a whole science that just studies how nature repeats itself in patterns, right? And so I thought, okay, so there are probably all kinds of triangles in nature that exemplify strength. And so how can I and how can I use this realistically to what we're doing? And so I started to craft this notion of this golden triangle. And so then, because I know that 3 people alone cannot make a show, the thing that I do this, I put the golden triangle on a platform, right? If you can think of a rectangular slab of concrete, right? Like a nice thick, slab of concrete. So I put my triangle on that. And then that slab is the rest of us, right? So that slab is me as executive producer, fact checkers, sound engineers, composers, photographers, tape syncers, graphic designers, our social media editor, our marketing people. So everybody who's down here as the support structure, right? We're there to support and hold this golden triangle steady. And we really tested that, right? We really tested this whole theory of the support and the golden triangle and the interdependence of these 3 core people for each team. And it has been successful every single time. Because what happens is that when one side is feeling like it's gonna, maybe tilt over, the other side just strengthens, and then we straighten up the triangle. And then other people come in and offer support, and all the hands go up, and we hold it in place until we get back to that stability. And so I offer that to you as a way of thinking about organizing the people so that everybody understands that they have really unique and important strengths that they bring, but that they also have the responsibility of making decisions, right, based on the parameters of the role that you have given them. I can talk about another concept that I've been developing and thinking about a little bit, just as a way for people to think about when they're organizing or reorganizing their teams. Okay, and this is gonna sound a little bit like psychotherapy. I promise you, it's not. It's not like it's not It's not psychotherapy. But I have given this presentation. For example, I gave a presentation about this to Microsoft, and I've talked to the Kennedy Center about this concept because they do a lot of artist development. And I've been writing about it privately, not publicly yet. And so it is definitely something that I'm using my company as a lab, right, to test this idea also. And so the idea is called the Arc of Intentionality. Right. And so intentionality is this really simple concept, which is really do what you want to do, right? Like start with what you want to do and then make your actions match the thing that you want to do and then do the thing that you want to do. That's it. It's very perceptibly simple. But I see it as an arc, right? So a nice half circle that begins and ends somewhere. And so I have talked to big and small teams about the importance of having that arc of intentionality touch every part of the creative process. And so obviously the beginning is someone has an idea and they share that idea with other people, and then they gather a team on this idea, and everyone gets a role, and we figure out what we need, and we figure out what we have, and we figure out how we're going to get the things that are still necessary. And so every part of that process has to be intentional, right? And you're thinking, okay, but if we already got together and we're in a conference room or we're on a Zoom talking about it, isn't that being intentional? No, that's just good attendance. You showed up, right? And so don't confuse showing up intentional. Those are two very different things, right? Mm-hmm. When you're being intentional, you come to a conversation, you come to change, understanding not just the desired outcome, but also understanding who your audience is, but also understanding who the stakeholders are. So that every time you propose an idea, every time you propose a change, you address each of those constituencies, right? So that you're not just throwing out ideas, right? You're thinking through all of these three populations of people who are going to be impacted before you share the idea. And here's what happens when you do that. Fewer people give you bad ideas. It's a wonderful filter, right? Because if everybody knows, hey, we're going to measure your idea because we've agreed ideas according to not just the outcome, but according to who the stakeholders are and according to who the audience is, then you have to sit there before you just throw out your idea and consider those, right? And so it's a wonderful way to get people to really sit with an idea and consider it deeply before they share it. But also it allows them to say, okay, I've got 2/3 of it kind of clear. Help me out with the other third. I'm not really sure how this is going to impact the stakeholders. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. Let's talk it through. It's a wonderful way and a very low stakes way to ask for help and support. And, you know, being creative, being in a room with other creatives, it can be very intense. It can be very high pressure. And, you know, especially if you're working on a very high level with very gifted people, you can feel like, oh, this is such a dumb idea. I'm not even. But if you're people who have come to agreement about we are going to measure through the arc of intentionality the value of our ideas, then it's a completely different ballgame, right? Mm-hmm. Then we are gathered intentionally to help this idea succeed. We are also gathered intentionally to test it in a way that is kind of agnostic. It doesn't matter who had the idea and whether we like that person or not, or whether they're the leader or not. We're just talking about the idea, right? And so we've put the idea in the middle of the table. Doesn't matter who came up with the idea, because we're now using the arc of intentionality to look at whether this could actually work for what we intend to create, right? So it's really, really important to think about that. So that's when you're working within the dynamics of the team. Now let's think about the broader market, right? And sorry to burst some bubbles, but this is a market. Podcasting is a market. It's a market of ideas. It's a market of creatives. It's a market of companies and individuals who want to make money, and we should be able to make money. It's a market, okay? And so if you cannot accept that, there's always yoga instructor. That might be a good option. It's less tense in the yoga room. I'm totally joking, but I find that just saying that to people really shakes them up. Just saying, this is a market, right? So you have to treat it like it's a market, right? Oh, yeah. And so the Arc of Intentionality, see, I have an accent, guys, from New York, the Bronx, and from the Dominican Republic, all mixed in there. Yeah. So the Arc of Intentionality applies when you're trying to figure out how to position your show in the marketplace that is podcast, right? So again, because we know, consider not just the thing, the product, the outcome, but the stakeholders, and also, most importantly, the audience. Because also, PS, and this is a separate conversation that I could have with you, you are not your ideal listener. I'm going to repeat that again. You are not your ideal listener. And I'm sorry to break your heart, because you're probably a wonderful person, but that's not your job. Okay? That is not your job as the person who created the thing or who's leading the thing. You are not your ideal listener. So this is, again, where the Arc of Intentionality comes in, where you have to be intentional about figuring out who your ideal listener is, right? And how do you do that? You do that by looking at the neighborhood. And this is a concept that Dan Meisner at Pacific Content wrote beautifully about 2 years ago. So you can find his article on Pacific Content, the newsletter. It's something like podcasting neighborhoods by Dan Meisner. And I loved this idea. As soon as I read his piece, I thought, this is a brilliant way to think about this, especially because I'm from New York City, where it's about your neighborhood, right? You don't, like if you're in New York City, you don't say, I'm from Brooklyn. You say, I'm from, Brooklyn Heights or Park Slope. Like, you identify with your neighborhood. So I immediately got this notion that, yes, podcasting is about neighborhood. So the first thing you have to do is figure out, what's your neighborhood, right? Where are the shows by subject area, by demographic, by whatever that might be, that would actually live in your neighborhood, right? So look at what those shows are doing. Listen deeply to those shows. Take notes about what's really good and what's okay about those shows. Go and look at their websites. Go and look at their social media. Listen to their promos. How do they present their show to their audience? How do they present their shows in advertising promotions also, right? So you've got to really start to be in tune to how the shows in your neighborhood are presenting themselves to different audiences. The next thing you should do is create a playlist. So I always tell people who are just starting out that before they even launch, they have to have a playlist of 10 shows, put their show in the middle of the playlist, and then 5 medium-sized and big-sized shows at the top of the list, and then 5 relatively smaller shows at so like the second, left or right, bottom up, however you want to organize your list. Because this is basically where your audience is going to come from at the beginning, right? So at the beginning, you're going to have to appeal to the same set of people who are already listening to shows that are about similar topics. And so having this list is going to be crucial for you, because you're going to be able to look at all of those shows and see how they're positioning themselves in the marketplace, how they're marketing themselves to their audiences, how they're introducing new ideas, new episodes, new guests, right? There's so much to be learned from people who have already been, especially if they're doing it on a really high level and really successfully. I mean, those are your teachers. Those are the shows that you should be listening to and paying attention to. Also, when you're ready, those are the shows you're going to reach out to for cross promotion, right? And so by doing this market reconnaissance, right? Mm-hmm. You're also setting yourself up for the latter stage, where you're setting up for your marketing and promotion. Because once you have your list, once you know who's in your neighborhood, it's just sending emails and saying, hi, Kid on the Block. I love your show. I think your audience would also enjoy listening to my show. I'd be happy to do a barter for an ad, for some social, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also pitch yourself, if you're the host, as a guest on those other shows. So all of this intentionality in getting to understand the market is really going to pay off in multiple ways, right? And so this is really, really important. Lastly, the last thing I'm going to say in this arc of intentionality is that one of the best things about podcasting is that somehow, even though we're, the it girl right now, we've managed to maintain a really good sense of community. And there is so much goodwill among podcasters, and there is so much willingness for people to reach out and connect you to someone else and help you out and get on a call with you and explain something to you. Do not underestimate the value of being someone who wants to be in community with other podcasters, right? So join the Slack channels, sign up for the newsletters, follow, other podcasters, be in conversation with them, congratulate people when their shows place well, congratulate people when they get a deal. Like, this is how we pay it forward, but how we also earn people to pay it back to us when it's our turn. And it will be, everybody's gonna get a turn, right? But there are absolutely things that you have to do, so that you can be ready for when it's your turn, right? And I'm gonna make my last metaphor because I actually just realized that this is a perfect metaphor. So a lot of you who are in the United States or abroad probably know about these mutual societies. In the US, we call them ZUSUs, right? And it's basically where your mom or your aunt, they put $100 into a 10 group savings, and every 10 weeks, guess what? Somebody gets $1,000, right? But you got to put in the $100 every week so that when it's your turn, you can get the 1,000. So that's basically how podcasting works. In terms of the goodwill of community, you've got to be putting in your goodwill every week, and then eventually, it's all going to come back to you, right? And so if you go into it with the intentionality of being someone who contributes to podcasting, you're going to get so much more than you put into it. Trust me. I was basically a refugee from traditional media 4 years ago, literally a refugee from traditional media 4 years ago. And I could never have imagined where and 97% of it was because of the goodwill that people have shown me and shown us, and how much mentoring I've received, and continue to receive and continue to seek out, because that is just the kind of space that I'm so blessed to work in. All right, thank you for listening.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's awesome. I do have another question for you along this line. A lot of podcasters, as you know, start off wanting to create a podcast around their passions, right? What they have a strong interest in, what they spend their time, really immersing themselves into, and that can translate into the ability to create ongoing content over many, many years. So you talk about creating teams, but a lot of podcasters are just individuals, right? And so, but I do know that podcasters over a period of time will move towards having a team, right? They'll get a virtual assistant, they'll get other folks that can come in and support them in their process in creating their podcasts. So you talk about the show that you create, that you want as a potential listener, but also as a creator, isn't necessarily what the listener wants. So how do you, as a content creator, do you think, in your opinion, walk that line between wanting to do a show that follows your heart and your passions, that may be the show that you would want to listen to? Because I think some podcasters have that viewpoint. And are there times when that type of show creates a commonality between your audience in yourself around that interest and that passion. So how do you walk that line between, or are some podcasts able to be built based on what the creator wants, and other shows that are maybe created by teams tend to be shows that are created to cater to a specific target audience, but may not be entirely focused on what the podcaster's passions are?
Great question. And you're right. So many podcasters are doing really well, and they're solopreneurs.
Right.
They're, superheroes, basically. And so there's a couple of things that I would suggest they consider. First, focus group, right? If you have an idea, get 5 people on a Zoom and share the idea. I mean, get 5 people who listen to podcasts, right? And say, here's what I'm thinking. Here's how I'd like to do it. Here's a list of potential interviews. Here's how I think I'm going to structure those, those shows. Just share. I know that it is a radical departure from the way many people think, that if you have an idea, you just keep it to yourself. Yeah, that doesn't work. You have to share your idea, right? Don't blast it on Twitter. Don't do that. But get 5 people around a Zoom, around a table, at a coffee, to just talk through what you're thinking, because it can create basically an echo chamber in your head where you just reinforce your own ideas, sometimes bad ideas, and just merely expressing them can begin to give you some clarity around where the red flags might be, where the pitfalls might be. And so that's number one. Just share the idea with a bunch of people. I would even, and I do this a lot, I like people who I mentor, I say to them, make it one sheet, right? It's one sheet of paper. Answer the most basic questions. Who's doing this? How are you going to do this? Why are you doing this? When do you intend to do this? Realistically, if you have a full-time job and a family, you literally need to carve out hours in the week to do this, right? But also, meaning when are you launching? When are you going to start promoting it? When are you going, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the most important question that everyone should ask themselves is, what does success look like? Because I think that we are, creatures who unfortunately believe the headlines, right? And so, guys, the average podcast has 5,000 downloads a month, right? That's a successful podcast, right? That's a successful podcast, right? And, we talk about this mythical 1,000 loyal listeners. That's a successful podcast. If you have consistently 1,000 unique listeners every month, you're doing well, right? And so you also have to, before you start, define what success is going to look like for you. Because if it is a passion project, maybe that's success. Maybe just the making of the thing, right? Because this is your creative outlet, because you're an actuary by day, but really you want to talk about modern dance, and you take your podcast and you talk all about modern dance. Fantastic, you've succeeded. So you have to have the measure of success before you even start the thing. And so those are 2 really actionable things that you should do. Here's a more conceptual thing that I really, really push people to do, which is, yes, your passion is a great place to start, because it's probably something you know a lot about. It's probably something that you know who the players are, you know who the key people are, you understand the trends. That's wonderful. You have already been amassing all this great knowledge, which from the production point of view is going to be invaluable, right? Because that's the treasure trove from which you're going to pull your ideas. However, my darling creative, that's a one-way street. And a one-way street, as you probably know, is not that interesting, right? It's not interesting to sit on the stoop and watch traffic go in the same direction, right? So what you want is to create an intersection, right? You want to create a corner. And so your passion and your idea in conversation with something else, right? So I was on Clubhouse the other day, and someone was talking about food and how passionate he is about food and how he's into food history. Oh, it was wonderful to hear him talk about this, right? And he wants to make a podcast about that. And I said, okay, that's a great place to start, but food and what? Right? I was like, where's the conflict? Where's the interest? Right? How are you going to sustain a conversation? Right? So let's put food in conversation with something else. Right? And I just started throwing ideas at him. Food and sports. There's an area that we haven't really explored, right? Food and religious practices. There's deep roots, right? And you can go in so many different ways, right? Food and social justice. Ooh, there's another one, right? So many ways that you can take your passion, put it in conversation with another idea, and then expand the possibilities tremendously, right? And then also that opens up the possibility that then you're going to get other people who want to come in and be collaborators with you, because maybe they're passionate about sports, or they're passionate about food in religious rituals, or they're passionate about social justice. Wow, now you're really giving yourself a whole open door for possibilities.
Yeah, so it's really kind of expanding, I think, and trying to find connections with more people, right? I think it would be the goal. I think oftentimes people's passions can be fairly narrow. So how can you establish an angle to the content, right, that maybe caters to a listener opportunity that may be exponential in its potential, because like you said, it's untapped or it hasn't been done before. So I think it's important to be clear on what your goals are about. You can take a passion, but then you probably need to add elements to it that make it one, unique, and two, scalable, too, and three, probably can cater to a much larger audience, because oftentimes passion interests can be very narrow, right? And they don't have huge audience potential. So I think that's one of the dangers of being too niche in the podcasting world. But it is hard, and I agree with you. I think getting feedback from other people on your show concept, your themes, your maybe how that show is produced, you're constantly looking for feedback and ways that you can improve on that. And that's why I'm a big proponent of not pre-producing a bunch of episodes at the beginning of your podcasting, is because you should be wanting to change your podcast, not dramatically, but maybe evolve it over time. And that's hard to do if you produce 10 episodes in advance of the launch of your show. So I've heard of so many people that have created 10 episodes in advance of the launch of their show, and they say, well, I'm only going to use 2 of those because after episode 1 or 2, I want to change the show, right? So it's one of those things that's great. We did get a question in, and this viewer wants to know more about your podcast and what you're doing, because I have a feeling they might want to subscribe.
Thanks for the plug.
Right.
I host one podcast, but I run a network. And so I'm very lucky that I get to work. I think we're up to 15, but don't quote me on that. Check the website. That's great. Because I've run out of fingers. I used to be able to count them all on my fingers, and what a wonderful blessing. And so the podcast that I host, that I created last year amid the pandemic and in response to the pandemic, is called How to Talk to Mommy and Papi About Anything. And the mommy and papi are in brackets because it's really how to talk to our parents, whatever you call your parents. And we've got people from all over the world who call their parents all kinds of different things. But the idea is, as an adult child, what are some of these difficult topics that we could use a little bit of help, so that we can get through to our parents, or at least so we can stop arguing with them about it. And so I call it our little baby, because it's our youngest and smallest show, but it's growing, small but mighty. And I love it because it actually did what I advocate people to do, which is my passion is to help, first gens like me, first generation Americans, to straddle the world between their parents and and our existence in the United States. So that's definitely a passion of mine. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't going to get on there and talk about it for 30 minutes every week. That would have been terrible. But what I did was I crossed it with experts. So I thought, okay, there are definitely lots of people who are really qualified and really smart who could give us a ton of advice, right? So let's take my passion, which is helping first gens figure out their parents, and then cross it with people who actually have experience and knowledge to share with us and have studied these things. And I launched it as an experiment during I can't remember what it was called, but it was a fundraiser for families who were impacted by COVID. And we launched it in 2 weeks because I believe in breaking things fast, recovering even faster, and then moving on. So we launched it in 2 weeks. And I had committed to 5 episodes, and I said, we'll see what happens with 5 episodes. And I had beforehand decided that if after 5 episodes, I don't see a particular, growth pattern, we'll just shut it down, because I've shut down podcasts before, and it's part of the process of iterating and creating. And so again, I basically did that one sheet for myself, who, what, where, when, why, and how, and decided if I don't see X number of, unique listeners, if et cetera, I parameters for success within those first episodes, and we met them all. And so then I committed to a full season, which to us was episodes. And then once we committed and we really started to think about the show and how to develop the show and really started to get into the essence of the show, we were like, we have something here. We have something really cool here. And then the emails started coming in, and more people, invited themselves to be on the show, and they wanted to share their stories. And that's when you've got something really cool. When other people who you've never met, who have no relationship to you, are emailing you and saying, oh my God, I have a story that I want to share on the show, right? And so we're now we just made a year. Yeah, in April, it was a year since we launched. And, I'm going to keep doing the show for as long as they let me. My team is going to be like, yeah, get out of here. We have a younger, cooler host.
I'm sure you did you're doing a fantastic job with it. But I agree with you. It's about building community around your show, and that's important on that. But well, thank you so much for your knowledge sharing today. I appreciate it very much.